Ancient city grids hold secrets far beyond their straight lines. This video reveals the profound truth behind geometric city plans, a phenomenon known as transgenerational urbanism, where entire cities were designed for a future their creators would never see. You will gain a completely new lens for understanding history, one where a civilization's greatest legacy is not a monument, but a master plan. What drove these societies to invest centuries of labor into blueprints for unborn generations? And what does this tell us about power, legacy, and our own place in time? How do you think our modern world measures up to that kind of long-term vision? The blueprint for such a city is a map of faith in the future. This is the essence of transgenerational urbanism, a term that sounds complex but describes a beautifully simple, radical idea. It is the act of designing an entire city, not for the present, but for a timeline that stretches far beyond the lifetime of the person who first draws the plan. Think of it not as building a statue to be admired tomorrow, but as planting the entire orchard for a forest that will take 100 years to grow. The architect knows he will never walk its shaded paths, yet he carefully charts where every oak and elm should go. This practice moves far beyond erecting a single grand temple or palace, those symbols of a ruler's immediate power. Instead, it encompasses the entire skeleton and lifeblood of a city. We are talking about designing the aqueducts and reservoirs that will supply water for generations unborn, laying out road networks wide enough for traffic not yet imagined, and zoning districts for functions that may not fully emerge for 50 years. This requires a specific kind of societal mindset. It implies a profound stability, a confidence that the civilization will endure, and a philosophical outlook where the well-being of the community a century from now is valued more highly than the personal glory one could claim today. The patience required is almost unimaginable to our modern sensibilities, where political and corporate cycles are measured in mere years. It is the ultimate act of stewardship, a gift wrapped in stone and geometry, passed from one generation to the next with a silent instruction: continue. This foundational concept is what allows us to separate fleeting vanity projects from true civilizational legacies. When we look at the ruins of an ancient city and see not just collapsed walls, but the ghost of a perfect grid, we are not just seeing a plan for buildings. We are reading a message in stone, a declaration that someone long ago believed in the people who are yet to come. To find the earliest whisper of this long-term vision, we must travel back more than 4,000 years to the banks of the mighty Indus River. Here, baked under a relentless sun, lies the silent enigma of Mohenjo-Daro. Its streets are not the winding, organic paths of an ancient village that simply grew over time. Instead, they form a startlingly precise grid, a geometric pattern of main avenues and smaller lanes that intersect at perfect right angles. This is not a happy accident. It is the product of one of humanity's first experiments in deliberate, large-scale urban planning. The entire city was conceived as a single, integrated system. Builders used standardized, kiln-fired bricks of a uniform ratio, a detail so consistent it hints at centralized oversight and quality control. Beneath those straight streets ran a complex, covered drainage network of brick-lined channels, designed to carry waste away from homes and public spaces, a remarkable feat of civil engineering focused on public health. At the city's heart stood the Great Bath, a large, waterproofed public pool likely used for ritual purification, showcasing a commitment to communal infrastructure. The true mystery, however, escalates when we look beyond Mohenjo-Daro alone. This same signature of order, the grid, the standardized bricks, the advanced drainage is found in other major Indus Valley centers like Harappa, spread across a vast region of what is now Pakistan and northwest India. This uniformity across hundreds of miles suggests something far more profound than a single, powerful ruler demanding a grand capital. It implies a shared cultural blueprint, a master plan for civilization itself that was understood and implemented across generations and distances. Archaeologists like Jonathan Mark Kenoyer point to another curious absence. Unlike in contemporary Mesopotamia or Egypt, Mohenjo-Daro shows no obvious, towering palaces or gargantuan temples dedicated to a single god king. The largest structures seem to be granaries and public works. This clues us into a different kind of power structure. The governing force behind this centuries-long project may not have been a pharaoh, but a stable, perhaps oligarchic, administration, a council of elders or a priestly class dedicated to maintaining a societal ideal. Their legacy was not a pyramid bearing one name, but 1,000 identical bricks in a sewer that worked for centuries, and streets laid straight for citizens they would never meet. They invested in collective resilience over individual aggrandizement, building a city not for a lifetime but for a civilization. Yet this concept of planning beyond a single lifetime is not exclusive to mysterious collective societies. It appears again in one of history's most iconic and seemingly personal monuments, the Pyramids of Egypt. We often see these colossal tombs as the ultimate symbol of a pharaoh's ego, a singular obsession with eternal glory. But to focus only on the silent, finished pyramid is to miss the roaring, meticulously organized human engine that built it. The true evidence of transgenerational thinking lies not in the tomb itself, but in the planned cities that housed the thousands of workers who constructed it. At the Giza Plateau, archaeologists like Mark Lehner have uncovered the remains of such a settlement. This was no haphazard shantytown. It was a carefully laid out administrative and logistical hub, complete with orderly streets, large communal bakeries, breweries, and dormitories. This city had a single, profound purpose: to sustain a vast, skilled workforce for a project that would span decades, often the entire reign of a pharaoh, and sometimes even longer. Think about the scale of that operation. You are not just quarrying stone, you are feeding, housing, and managing a small city of artisans, engineers, and laborers for a generation. The infrastructure required, the steady supply of bread and beer, the management of tools and materials, all of this demanded a blueprint that was as precise as the pyramid's own geometry. The layout served a long-term logistical function, ensuring the project's continuity regardless of individual lives. Workers would age, supervisors would change, but the city's design kept the machine running. Lehner's work shows these settlements were built in phases and, tellingly, abandoned in phases once the work was complete. This indicates a vision that transcended the daily needs of any single individual, even the pharaoh. It was planning for a cosmic deadline, the king's journey to the afterlife, which was a national spiritual imperative. The entire culture was aligned to this multi-generational goal. The Pyramid City, therefore, stands as a powerful testament. It reveals that even a project centered on a single ruler's destiny required the foresight and stable infrastructure of a society thinking in terms of decades. It was a civilization marshalling its collective effort across time, building the temporary to achieve the eternal, and in doing so, leaving behind the ghostly footprints of a city that existed for one purpose only: to build a legacy for the ages. But a grid can be more than an administrative tool. It can become a political manifesto written in stone. Centuries after the Indus Valley cities fell silent, a new philosophy of order emerged from the ashes of a Greek city named Miletus. After its destruction by the Persian Empire in the early 5th century BCE, Miletus faced a rare and profound opportunity: a complete blank slate. The task of rebuilding was entrusted to a thinker named Hippodamus, and what he produced was revolutionary. His plan was a rigid, geometric grid of straight streets intersecting at perfect right angles, dividing the city into uniform, rectangular blocks. This was not merely for aesthetic neatness or military efficiency, though those were benefits. This was a physical embodiment of an ideal. In the wake of conflict, Hippodamus designed a city to promote a stable, rational, and democratic social order. The grid, in his vision, was a machine for creating good citizens. Every block had a designated purpose, public spaces were carefully integrated, and the equal, repetitive allotments of land mirrored the concept of equal citizenship under the law. The design aimed to minimize the chaotic, factional alleyways of older cities and instead promote transparency, fairness, and a sense of shared civic space. It was architecture as moral philosophy. The plan was so powerful, so clearly linked to the rising ideals of the Greek polis, that it became a model exported across the Mediterranean. From the port of Piraeus in Athens to new colonial foundations, the Hippodamian plan was replicated. The great philosopher Aristotle later observed that such orderly, planned cities were conducive to good governance, noting how the layout itself could influence the habits and interactions of the people within it. This is the core of the enigma. Hippodamus and the societies that adopted his blueprint were attempting something astonishing. They were trying to etch a social contract directly into the landscape. By designing a city that logically organized space for public debate, commerce, and worship, they believed they could architect a stable society resistant to internal strife. The plan was a vessel intended to carry democratic ideals through the turbulent seas of political change, long after its original designer was gone. It was a bet that rationality, literally set in stone, could outlive the passions of any single generation. The longevity of this idea, copied and adapted for centuries, shows a profound faith in design. They believed that by shaping the physical world in a certain image, they could gently, persistently shape human behavior for generations to come, making the city itself the guardian of its own founding principles. The Roman Empire understood that conquest was only the beginning. To truly hold a territory, you had to change its very landscape, and they did this with a tool more powerful than any legion, the master-planned city. Across the vast expanse of their empire, from the damp mists of Britain to the arid sands of North Africa, Roman engineers planted identical urban seeds known as coloniae. These were not random settlements, they were deliberate acts of architectural cloning. Each one was a miniature Rome, built to a precise and unvarying template. At its heart lay two main streets, the cardo running north-south and the decumanus running east-west, intersecting at the center to form a perfect cross. Around this crossroads grew the forum, the basilica, the public baths, and the temples. It was a complete civic kit, a prefabricated vision of Roman order that could be unpacked and assembled anywhere in the known world. The genius of this system was its speed and consistency. A general could secure a new province, and within a few years, a functioning Roman city would stand where there was once a foreign hill fort or empty plain. This was not just about providing homes for retired legionnaires, though that was a key function. It was a profound strategy of cultural assimilation. A veteran who had spent 25 years marching under the eagle would now live out his days in a city that looked, felt, and functioned exactly like the distant heart of the empire he had served. He would raise his children in its orderly streets, worship at its familiar temples, and conduct business in its forum. Within a generation, the local population would be drawn into this nexus of commerce, law, and culture. The city itself, through its daily routines and imposing architecture, became the teacher of Romanness. As historian A. Trevor Hodge noted, these towns were seeds of empire. They were designed to take root and grow, stabilizing volatile frontiers not for a season but for centuries. The geometric grid was a silent promise of permanence. It told both the settler and the local that Rome was not a passing storm, but a new and enduring reality. The plan was so robust, so clearly divorced from the personality of any single emperor or general, that it could outlive them all. A colonia founded by Julius Caesar would function identically to one founded 100 years later by Hadrian. The blueprint itself was the agent of long-term control, a physical contract guaranteeing a specific way of life would continue long after the last soldier who laid its first stone was gone. In this way, Rome weaponized urban planning, building not just cities but the future itself, one identical, orderly block at a time. Far from the Mediterranean, in the high valley of Mexico, a different kind of geometric perfection speaks to a vision of cosmic order. The ruins of Teotihuacan are staggering not just for their size, but for their silent, ceremonial precision. Here, the central axis is not called a cardo or a decumanus, but the street of the dead, a broad avenue flanked by massive platforms that stretches for over a mile toward the distant pyramid of the moon. The entire city is a vast, aligned grid, but this grid is not primarily about traffic or commerce. Every major structure is positioned with an astronomical intent. The pyramids of the sun and moon, and even the smaller temple of the feathered serpent, are carefully oriented to key solar events like the equinoxes and to the cycles of the stars. The city itself is a stone calendar, a map of the heavens laid upon the earth. This creates a profound enigma. While we can measure the angles and decode the alignments, we have no clear idea who commanded this centuries-long project. Unlike the pharaohs of Egypt or the emperors of Rome, Teotihuacan has yielded no grand statues of a single ruler, no tombs overflowing with personal treasure for a god-king. The evidence, as interpreted by archaeologists like George Cowgill, points instead to a form of collective governance. Power may have been shared among councils, priestly orders, or rotating leaders. This changes everything about how we read the city plan. The meticulous cosmological layout was not the vanity of one individual, but the sacred blueprint of an entire society. It was a communal vision of humanity's place in the universe, literally set in stone for all future generations to inhabit and understand. Building to such a scale, with such exacting celestial alignment, required a continuity of purpose that could span 100 years or more. The original planners knew they would never see the final form of their city, but they laid the lines true, trusting their descendants to follow the template. In this light, the grid of Teotihuacan becomes more than streets and buildings. It becomes a kind of architectural constitution, a set of immutable principles that guided the life of the city long after its founders had passed. The true ruler of Teotihuacan was not a person, but the plan itself, a permanent physical covenant between the people, their gods, and the turning sky above them. But a city's true longevity is not measured by its grandest monuments, but by its most hidden arteries. The geometric street plan is the visible skeleton, but the lifeblood of any civilization, the thing that truly allows it to thrive for centuries, flows underground. This is where we find the most profound and unsung evidence of transgenerational thinking, in the engineering marvels of infrastructure. These are not projects built for glory, but for survival, representing a staggering societal bet on a future its planners would never see. Consider the Qanat systems of ancient Persia, a masterpiece of patient ingenuity. In the arid plateaus where surface water was a fleeting treasure, Persian engineers devised a way to capture it at its source. They would tunnel back into the foothills of mountains, digging a gently sloping underground channel, sometimes for dozens of miles, to tap into a water table. Vertical shafts were dug down to the tunnel at regular intervals for construction, maintenance, and ventilation. This was not a project for a single lifetime. Excavating a single Qanat could take decades of dangerous, meticulous work. The knowledge of how to find the water, calculate the precise slope, and reinforce the tunnels was a specialized craft passed from one generation of diggers to the next. A father might begin a tunnel his grandson would finally see reach the distant plain, where it would emerge to feed orchards and nourish a city. The entire community's future depended on this invisible, inherited labor. The Khanate was not just a water source, it was a physical covenant between generations, a silent agreement that the work of the past would be maintained by the present for the sake of the future. On the other side of the ancient world, Rome made a similar, monumental wager beneath its own streets. The Cloaca Maxima, the Great Sewer, began not as a grand imperial project, but as a simple drainage ditch in the time of the early kings. Over centuries, as Rome grew from a collection of hillside villages into a metropolis of 1 million people, this humble ditch was expanded, lined with stone, vaulted over, and transformed into a vast subterranean river. It was a project that spanned the entire history of the Republic and the Empire, constantly being improved and extended by different rulers and administrators across hundreds of years. No single emperor could claim its completion, for it was never truly finished. It was always adapting to the growing city above. This reflects a breathtaking institutional continuity. The Roman state, through all its political upheavals, maintained the vision that a healthy city required this hidden circulatory system. The investment was colossal and offered no immediate political reward, no triumphal arch. Its purpose was purely functional, to prevent illness and flooding, to remove the waste of a civilization so the city itself could endure. The engineers who designed its later arches and the laborers who cleaned its channels were servicing a machine begun by people who had been dust for half a millennium. This is the quiet, essential truth of long-term planning. While emperors built forums and pharaohs raised pyramids, the true architects of permanence were often the unsung engineers who plotted the slope of a water channel or the course of a sewer. These projects bind generations together through a shared, practical dependence. A citizen in ancient Rome drawing water from a public fountain, or a farmer in Persia tending a garden fed by a Khanate, was connected directly to the foresight and labor of ancestors they could never know. The infrastructure itself becomes the lasting legacy, a network of necessity that outlasts dynasties and conquers time simply by being indispensable. It asks a silent, powerful question of us today. In an age of immediate results, what are we building beneath the surface that our great-grandchildren will thank us for? This symbolic dimension reveals a city's deepest ambition: to become part of the cosmos. For many ancient planners, the geometric grid was not merely a tool for organizing society. It was a sacred diagram, a deliberate attempt to anchor human civilization within the eternal rhythms of the universe. This was achieved through celestial anchoring, the precise alignment of streets, temples, and entire city, axes with celestial events like the solstice sunrise or the path of a specific star. The practical and the profound merged into one. In the forbidden city of Beijing, the central axis is aligned with the North Star, a fixed point in the heavens known as the pivot of the sky. This was not an architectural whim. It was a statement written in stone and timber, declaring that the Emperor, the Son of Heaven, ruled from a throne aligned with the cosmic center. His authority was thus derived from and mirrored in the unchanging heavens. Similarly, in the jungles of Mesoamerica, cities like Copan and Eixample were laid out with ceremonial causeways and pyramid stairways aligned to capture the sun's rays on the equinoxes or to track the cycles of Venus. These alignments served a vital, dual purpose. On one level, they created a giant, permanent calendar. The movement of light and shadow across a specific corner of a temple at a precise moment told the people when to plant, when to harvest, and when to conduct essential ceremonies. It was a clock built into the landscape, a way of telling cosmic time that required no moving parts, just the patient observation of generations. On a deeper, spiritual level, this alignment connected the city directly to the eternal. By mirroring the heavens on earth, the planners were weaving their community into the fabric of the universe itself. The city became a microcosm, a reflection of the divine order. This connection created a powerful, sacred duty for its inhabitants, maintaining the precise alignments, preserving the sightlines to the horizon, and keeping the ceremonial pathways clear became acts of cosmic maintenance. It was how the community ensured its continued harmony with the gods and the natural world. This symbolic layer provided a powerful incentive for preserving the original geometric plan across political upheavals. A new dynasty or ruling family might take power, but to alter the sacred alignments would be to risk severing the city's lifeline to the heavens, inviting cosmic disharmony. The plan itself, therefore, gained a kind of divine authority. It was no longer just the design of a king or a council, it was a covenant with the stars. The immense effort required to achieve this, the generations of astronomical observation, the sophisticated surveying needed to translate a star's path into a street's direction, all of it represents an investment in eternity. They were building a home not just for the living, but for the very idea of order, creating a place that whispered to every future generation, "You are part of something timeless." A perfect grid, however, is a fragile thing. It exists in a constant battle against the entropy of daily life, the slow creep of ad hoc stalls, the gradual encroachment of private buildings onto public space, and the human desire to bend the rules for personal convenience. A master plan drawn for the ages is just ink on parchment unless there is a dedicated force to defend its lines year after year, generation after generation. This is where the true custodians of the long-term vision emerge, not kings or architects, but bureaucrats. The survival of geometric order across centuries often required the creation of a professional class whose sole purpose was to be the memory of the city, to uphold the original template against the relentless pressure of the present. Think of them as the immune system of the urban body, constantly identifying and correcting deviations to keep the grand design healthy and intact. One of the most famous examples comes from Rome with the agrimensors, the land surveyors. These were not simple measurers, they were a highly trained, almost priestly order of engineers, using an instrument called a groma to sight perfect right angles across the landscape. They were the ones who physically stamped the geometric grid of a new colony onto the raw earth. Their work was considered so sacred and foundational that it was protected by law. The boundary stones they placed, marking the limits of public and private land, were inviolable. To move one was a serious offense. Their meticulous records, inscribed on bronze tablets and stored in archives, provided the legal and physical blueprint that could be referenced decades or even centuries later to settle disputes or guide new construction. The system they created was so robust, so detached from any single ruler's whim, that it continued to function long after the Western Roman Empire fell, its principles echoing in medieval land law. On the other side of the world, a different bureaucratic tradition performed a similar custodial role. In China, the immense, stable bureaucracy of the Confucian state became the guardian of capital city plans through successive dynastic changes. When a new family took the mandate of heaven, they often did not raise the old capital and start anew. Instead, they occupied it, and the scholarly administrative class, steeped in classical texts and precedents, would work to restore the city to its idealized geometric form as recorded in historical archives. The plan of Chang'an, for instance, with its symmetrical grid, its cardinal orientation, and its designated wards, was a physical expression of cosmic and social order. Maintaining that plan was a Confucian duty, a way of demonstrating that the new rulers were upholding proper harmony between heaven, earth, and mankind. The bureaucrats, through their registries, maps, and regulations, acted as a check against a ruler's impulsive desire to build a grandiose personal monument that might disrupt the city's sacred symmetry. Their power was subtle but profound. They enforced continuity. This reveals a fascinating and counterintuitive truth about these ancient planned cities. While we often attribute their creation to the vision of a single powerful figure, their longevity was frequently secured by the very institutions designed to limit such individual power. The surveyor with his groma and the magistrate with his scroll became the true guardians of transgenerational intent. Their daily, unglamorous work of measuring plots, reviewing permits, and consulting old maps was a quiet, persistent rebellion against short-term thinking. They served not a person but a principle embedded in the streets themselves. In doing so, they answered a silent question posed by every great geometric plan. Who will remember this when we are gone? The bureaucracy was the answer, a society's promise to its future self, written not in stone but in procedure and law. Yet the most powerful motivation for such enduring plans may be surprisingly practical. A geometric grid is not just a sacred diagram or a political statement. It is a remarkably efficient economic engine. This is where long-term thinking shifts from the philosophical to the profoundly pragmatic, building a framework for sustainable growth and collective wealth that can last for centuries. The logic is straightforward. A clear, predictable street layout facilitates movement, trade, and the easy division of property. It reduces confusion, minimizes disputes over boundaries, and allows a city to expand in an orderly, manageable way. This creates a stable environment where commerce can flourish, because merchants and investors can trust that the basic rules of the urban landscape will not change capriciously. The plan itself lowers what economists call transaction costs, the hidden friction of doing business, for everyone who comes after. A powerful example of this deliberate economic foresight is found in the early history of the United States. In the late 1600s, William Penn received a vast land grant to establish a colony based on his Quaker principles of peace and tolerance. He named its capital Philadelphia, meaning the city of brotherly love. But Penn had witnessed the chaotic, cramped, and fire-prone conditions of older European cities like London. He wanted to prevent those same dangers from taking root in his new world. His solution was a rigid, rectangular grid plan, with wide streets laid out in a checkerboard pattern and 5 public squares distributed evenly throughout the city to provide green space and prevent overcrowding. This was not merely an aesthetic choice, it was a preventative economic and social policy written directly into the landscape. The wide streets were intended to reduce fire risk, improve sanitation, and allow for the easy flow of goods and people. The uniform blocks made property surveying simple and transparent, encouraging fair development and reducing legal conflicts over land ownership. Penn was literally planning for prosperity, designing a city where orderly commerce and healthy living could become the norm, not the exception. He was building a vessel for future wealth. In this sense, a master plan like Philadelphia's functions as a kind of non-physical trust fund for a city's future. The initial investment of thought and surveying creates a framework that appreciates in value as the city grows. Every new building, every new business benefits from the clarity and predictability the original grid provides. The plan reduces uncertainty, and in economics, reduced uncertainty is the bedrock of investment and growth. It allows generations of merchants, homeowners, and city planners to make decisions with a longer view, because the fundamental skeleton of their city is dependable. This rational layout is therefore one of the most profound investments a society can make in its own collective future wealth. It is a gift of clarity and opportunity passed down through time, ensuring that the economic potential of a place is not choked by the short-sighted chaos of its own growth. The streets themselves become silent partners in every business transaction, every property deed, and every future expansion, a permanent infrastructure for prosperity that asks nothing in return but to be maintained and respected. But what does it feel like to live inside one of these grand designs? Beyond the economics and the engineering lies a quieter, more personal legacy, the psychological architecture of a planned city. Walking its straight avenues and uniform blocks does something subtle yet profound to the human mind. It creates a deep-seated sense of stability. In a world often filled with uncertainty, the geometric grid offers a promise of predictability. You know how to navigate it. You can trust that a street will continue in a straight line, that a public square will be where the map says it is. This reliable framework becomes the stable backdrop against which the vibrant, chaotic drama of daily life, the markets, the festivals, the personal joys and struggles, can safely unfold. This is not a small thing. The historian Spiro Kostov spent his career exploring how urban form actively shapes social life. A city's plan, he argued, is never neutral. It instructs. A geometric layout intended to endure for centuries becomes a silent, persistent teacher for each new generation born within its lines. Without a single word, it lessons its inhabitants in concepts of balance, proportion, and the careful allocation of shared space. It whispers the values of its founders through the experience of moving through it. Think of a wide, tree-lined boulevard leading to a central plaza. This design doesn't just move traffic, it pulls people together, encouraging congregation and public interaction. It physically demonstrates that community space is valuable. Conversely, the clear division between public thoroughfares and private residential blocks teaches a respect for the boundary between communal and personal life. This embedded philosophy of order provides a powerful psychological comfort. When the physical world follows a logical, comprehensible pattern, it can foster an internal sense of security and clarity. This comfort, multiplied across thousands of individuals over generations, translates into a significant long-term social benefit, a potential reduction in the friction of communal living. When people share an intuitive understanding of how their city works, when they feel a collective ownership of its orderly public realms, it can strengthen civic identity and foster cohesion. The city itself becomes a shared project, a masterpiece they are all inhabiting and maintaining together. The geometric plan, therefore, builds more than streets, it builds a mindset. It is an enduring legacy of mental and social architecture, carefully laying down a foundation of calm and predictability upon which a thriving, resilient community can be built, century after century. The true gift of the long-term planner may not be the city you see, but the sense of belonging and stability they hoped you would feel. The true test of any great plan is what happens when its founder is gone. History offers us a stark and revealing contrast, a tale of two cities built with vastly different visions of time. On one side, we have Amarna, the dazzling, short-lived capital of the Egyptian pharaoh Akhenaten. In the 14th century BCE, Akhenaten broke with centuries of tradition, rejecting the old gods to worship a single solar deity, the Aten. To cement this religious revolution, he ordered the construction of an entirely new capital city on a barren stretch of the Nile's east bank. Built with astonishing speed, Amarna was a masterpiece of innovative urban design for its time, with a linear layout following the river's course, spacious villas for officials, and open-air temples to the sun. Yet, for all its architectural brilliance, Amarna possessed a fatal flaw. Its entire reason for existence was inextricably tied to the will and radical beliefs of one man. When Akhenaten passed, his religious revolution collapsed. The powerful priesthoods and the general populace, whose lives had been upended, had no lasting stake in maintaining his singular vision. The city was not built upon a template that served a broader, enduring purpose for Egypt itself. It served only a pharaoh's ego and theology. Within a few years of his death, the court returned to Thebes, the old gods were restored, and Amarna was systematically dismantled, its stones carted away to be reused elsewhere. It became a ghost city, a cautionary monument to planning for a single lifetime. Now, shift your gaze over 1,000 years and 1,000 miles to the foothills of the Alps in northern Italy. Here, the Romans founded a military colony around the late 1st century BCE, naming it Augusta Taurinorum, what we know today as Turin. They did not build a unique monument to a general's glory. Instead, they laid down the standard Roman blueprint, the same orthogonal grid of the cardo and decumanus, the same uniform city blocks, the same predictable, reusable formula they applied from Britain to Syria. This grid was not about one man, it was about an entire system, a machine for Romanization, administration, and economic life. When the Western Roman Empire faded, the city did not vanish. The underlying geometric template proved too valuable to discard. Its clear logic provided a resilient foundation. In the medieval era, new buildings rose within the old Roman blocks, respecting the ancient street lines. During the Renaissance and Baroque periods, grand new palaces and piazzas were elegantly inserted into the classical grid, enhancing it rather than erasing it. Today, you can walk through Turin's modern city center and still trace the perfect right angles of the original Roman plan, a 2,000-year-old skeleton still supporting a vibrant, living metropolis. This dramatic contrast between Amarna's dust and Turin's streets reveals the essential principle for any plan meant to span generations. For a design to outlive its creator, it must transcend that creator. It cannot be solely an expression of personal will or a temporary ideology. It must serve a broader, enduring purpose, whether economic, administrative, or cultural, that gives multiple generations a tangible stake in its preservation. The Roman grid was a tool for prosperity, order, and identity, a system so useful that successive civilizations chose to maintain and build upon it. Akhenaten's plan, however visionary, served only a king and a momentary theological idea. The city itself never became bigger than its founder. Its fate asks us a poignant question about our own world. Are we building personal monuments, or are we laying down templates for a future we will never see, but that others will find indispensable? Perhaps the most ambitious extension of this idea is that a city's geometry can be designed not just to organize people, but to perfect them. This brings us to the realm of sacred geometry and philosophical ideals, where the lines of a street map become a diagram for the human soul. For many ancient and Renaissance thinkers, certain mathematical ratios were not just pleasing to the eye, they were echoes of a divine, universal order. The golden mean, a proportion found in nature from seashells to flower petals, and perfect squares and circles were seen as reflections of cosmic harmony. To incorporate these ratios into a city plan was to literally build heaven on earth, to align human habitation with the fundamental principles of creation. This was far more than an aesthetic choice, it was a profound moral and spiritual project. The philosopher Plato, in his work The Republic, described an ideal city-state, Callipolis, which was geometrically ordered to cultivate justice and wisdom in its citizens. He believed the physical environment could shape character. Centuries later, during the Renaissance, this Platonic dream was revived by architects and thinkers like Antonio Filarete, who designed a star-shaped city called Esforzinda, named for his patron. Its radial geometry was intended to foster a centralized, harmonious society. These were not just pretty drawings, they were blueprints for social utopia. The core belief was that by structuring space according to perfect, rational principles, you could structure society and the individual mind in the same way. A citizen walking through streets proportioned by the golden mean, or living in a district laid out as a perfect square, would be subtly, constantly guided toward balance, virtue, and rational thought. The chaotic impulses of human nature would be calmed by the serene logic of the surroundings. This transforms the city from a passive container of life into an active instrument of cultural engineering. It becomes a teacher, a silent parent to every generation born within its walls. The planners behind such visions were playing the longest game imaginable. They hoped that by hard-coding their ideals of harmony, order, and beauty into the very bricks and avenues, these values would be perpetuated indefinitely. The city itself would do the work of civilization, gently molding behavior toward a shared ideal across the span of centuries. It was a grand, hopeful experiment, a bet that architecture could be a permanent moral force. This layer of intent asks us to look at the surviving geometric plans not just as feats of engineering, but as philosophical statements frozen in stone. They are evidence of a timeless human yearning, not just to build shelter, but to build a better kind of person, and to trust that a design laid down today could quietly shepherd souls toward that ideal for 1,000 tomorrows. But a perfect, rigid plan can become a prison. This presents the ultimate paradox for any transgenerational design. How can a blueprint meant to last for centuries also bend and breathe, adapting to changes its creators could never foresee? A city is not a statue, it is a living organism. Technological revolutions like the sudden arrival of the automobile or unexpected population booms can turn a once logical grid into a congested trap. The history of urban planning is littered with beautiful, inflexible designs that ultimately failed because they could not evolve. They were perfect snapshots of an ideal, frozen in time, and time simply moved on without them. The true genius of a lasting plan, therefore, is not found in its rigidity, but in its intelligent flexibility. It must provide a strong, clear skeleton while leaving space for the flesh of the city to grow and change organically. Consider the challenge faced by Barcelona in the mid-19th century. Its medieval core was cramped and unhealthy, and the city needed to expand. The solution was the Eixample, a vast new district designed by Ildefons Serda. His plan was a geometric marvel, a near-endless grid of wide streets and square city blocks. But here was the critical innovation. The blocks were not filled with prescribed buildings. Instead, Serda designed them with chamfered corners, creating octagonal intersections that improved light, air, and traffic flow. More importantly, the interior of each block was initially left as open space, intended for gardens and communal use. This modular grid established an incredibly strong, orderly framework for growth, but within each block, it allowed for tremendous architectural variety and adaptation. Over decades, as needs changed, those open courtyards were sometimes built upon, but the essential street grid and the benefits of those open corners remained, allowing the district to absorb new architectural styles, transportation needs, and population density without collapsing into chaos. Serda did not design a finished city, he designed a resilient system for city-making. This balance between order and organic growth is the silent, unsung hallmark of the most successful long-term plans. They think in layers. The foundational layer is the permanent geometric structure, the main arteries, the cardinal axes, the public squares. This is the gift of clarity and orientation passed to all future generations. Then, on top of that stable base, the plan allows for a layer of gradual, incremental change, the filling in of blocks, the evolution of architectural fashion, the adaptation of buildings from one use to another. The ancient Roman grid, for all its rigidity, often functioned this way. The broad cardo and decumanus remained fixed, but the insulae, the city blocks, could be subdivided, rebuilt, and repurposed over the centuries. The plan provided the permanent street address, while the life at that address could change with the times. This is the ultimate test of a transgenerational vision. A plan that is too loose becomes a tangled, inefficient mess within a few generations, but a plan that is too rigid becomes a brittle relic, abandoned the moment it meets an unforeseen challenge. The sweet spot, the mark of true foresight, is a design that understands its own role not as a detailed script, but as a strong, simple stage. It sets the boundaries and the sightlines, trusting that future players will need to perform stories the original playwright could never have imagined. It guides growth without strangling it, offering a framework for continuity that is, paradoxically, flexible enough to ensure its own survival. The silent stones and buried foundations of these cities hold their own testimony. To move from admiring a geometric pattern to understanding the intent behind it, we must become detectives of the dust, learning to read the subtle clues left by the planners themselves. How can we be sure a grid represents a centuries-long vision and not just a momentary whim that happened to stick? The answer lies not in ancient texts, which are often silent on such practical matters, but in the ground beneath our feet, in the forensic evidence of archaeology. This is where we search for the material fingerprints of long-term thinking. One of the most telling signs is infrastructure built far in advance of immediate need. At sites like Mohenjo-Daro, archaeologists have found something remarkable. The elaborate, city-wide drainage system, with its carefully laid brick channels and sump pots, was not an afterthought dug into existing neighborhoods. It was constructed as part of the foundational work. The major drains were laid down first, and then the streets were paved over them, and finally the houses were built to connect into this preordained network. This sequence is a blueprint in action. It reveals a construction order that prioritizes the permanent, hidden skeleton of the city over its visible skin. You do not invest that much labor in a subterranean sewer for a tentative settlement. You build it because you are absolutely certain a great city will stand here for generations to come. It is a colossal down payment on the future. Another powerful clue is the use of a standardized measurement system across vast distances. In the Indus Valley, the consistent use of a specific brick size and a precise unit of length, now called the Indus inch, across multiple cities separated by hundreds of miles, speaks volumes. This uniformity implies something far more stable than a charismatic leader's command. It suggests a centralized, enduring planning authority, a bureaucratic or technical institution that maintained and disseminated a master template. This institution provided the rules, and local builders followed them, ensuring that the vision remained coherent across space and, crucially, across time. The survival of these standards implies they were taught, recorded, and respected long after the first surveyor's line was drawn. Archaeologists also look for the physical markers of that initial act of creation. The discovery of surveying posts, foundation deposits, or ceremonial pits at the corners of major axes or beneath gateways are like ceremonial time capsules. These are often part of foundational rites, rituals performed to sanctify and fix the plan in place, linking it to the gods or ancestors, and marking it as inviolable for all who come after. Finding such features tells us the founding was a deliberate, solemn act, not a casual beginning. Each of these material clues, the premature sewer, the ubiquitous brick, the ceremonial post, is a piece of evidence in a larger argument. Together, they allow us to distinguish between a city that grew organically, like a twisting vine, and one that was deliberately planted as a sapling according to a precise horticultural plan. They provide the tangible proof for the ambitious minds of the ancient world, individuals and institutions who looked at an empty plain and saw not just a town, but a legacy in geometric form, a gift of order intended to endure long after their names were forgotten. Even the most forceful imposition can become a beloved inheritance if it solves a problem for the ages. This is the complex legacy of Baron Haussmann and his radical transformation of Paris in the mid-19th century. Under the direction of Emperor Napoleon III, Haussmann did not merely tinker with the city, he performed major surgery. With relentless efficiency, he carved broad, straight boulevards directly through the city's medieval heart, a dense, tangled labyrinth of narrow streets. The motivations were immediate and pragmatic. The wide avenues, impossible to barricade, were designed to prevent the kind of popular uprisings that had plagued Paris for decades, giving the military clear lines of sight and rapid access. They also addressed a public health crisis, bringing sunlight and fresh air into overcrowded districts and allowing for the installation of a modern sewer and water system beneath the new streets. Yet, in solving these urgent problems of control and sanitation, Haussmann accidentally authored a new, enduring identity for the city. the geometric network of grand boulevards, lined with uniform, elegant limestone buildings and punctuated by ornamental parks, created a visual harmony and a sense of monumental scale that became synonymous with Paris itself. The plan was top-down, authoritarian, and deeply disruptive, displacing thousands. But the key to its survival across subsequent republics and revolutions was its undeniable functional and aesthetic success. It gave the city a new skeleton that worked better for the modern age. Future generations who never knew the cramped, darker Paris inherited a framework of grandeur and efficiency so effective that it became politically untouchable, the very definition of the city. Haussmann's Paris demonstrates a difficult truth. A plan does not need to be democratic to become transgenerational. It simply needs to provide a solution so valuable that later generations choose to keep it, effectively adopting the vision as their own. This impulse to start from a perfect geometric blueprint roared into the 20th century with even more audacity. In the late 1950s, Brazil sought to catalyze development in its interior by building a new capital from nothing. The result was Brasilia, a city conceived entirely on a drawing board by urban planner Lucio Costa and architect Oscar Niemeyer. Its plan is iconic, a stark, modernistic diagram resembling a bird or an airplane, with a monumental axis for government buildings and sweeping residential wings following curved superblocks. This was transgenerational planning in its most idealistic, modernist form. Every function was zoned, every sightline calculated, every curve intended to express a forward-looking, egalitarian society. It was a complete physical manifesto for the future. Yet, Brasilia also reveals the potential tension in such a comprehensive vision. Designed for the automobile and for a specific, orderly social life, it struggled to accommodate the organic, messy human needs that arose around it. Its very geometric perfection could feel impersonal to those living within its lines. The story of Brasilia asks a poignant question of any grand plan. Can a design be so complete that it leaves no room for the future to add its own chapter? Both Paris and Brasilia, separated by a century, prove that the drive for transgenerational planning is not a relic. It is a recurring human response to the challenges of density, health, and identity. They force us to confront a profound ethical question embedded in the straight lines and grand avenues. Who has the right to impose a vision on a landscape that will be inhabited by millions of unborn people? Is it the autocrat, the visionary architect, the democratic state, or some combination of all three? The answer is etched into the cities we live in today. Every time we walk down a wide boulevard, navigate a numbered grid, or marvel at a skyline designed as a single composition, we are walking through someone else's dream of the future. We are the generation they were planning for, living in the answer to their silent question. The legacy of their decision, for better or worse, is the physical world we now call home. The power to etch a future into stone has rarely rested with the crowd. Throughout history, the grand geometric visions we have walked through were almost always imposed from above by a pharaoh, an emperor, a council of elders, or a visionary autocrat like Baron Haussmann. They possessed a singular authority to command a multi-generational project, but this presents a profound and modern dilemma. In a democratic society where power is distributed, public opinion shifts, and political cycles are measured in mere years, who has the right to plan for a century? How does a diverse community with countless competing needs and voices agree on a single, enduring physical form for their city? The challenge is not just technical, it is deeply philosophical. It asks whether a system built on short-term accountability can muster the collective will for long-term stewardship. Imagine trying to get consensus today on the exact width of a boulevard that won't reach its full canopy of trees for 50 years, or on preserving an undeveloped corridor for a transit line that won't be needed until our grandchildren are adults. The immediate costs are tangible, while the benefits are a distant, abstract promise. This is the democratic tension between the urgent now and the important tomorrow. Our political and economic systems often tragically favor the now. A mayor facing re-election is incentivized to fund a popular park that opens in 2 years, not to break ground on the massive, unpopular reservoir project that will secure the water supply for the next century. The geometric plan, which requires patience and deferred gratification, struggles to find a champion in the noisy arena of the present. So what institutions could possibly bridge this gap? Some societies have experimented with independent, non-partisan planning commissions, staffed by professionals and insulated from the electoral cycle, tasked with guarding a city's long-term master plan. Others have embedded principles of sustainable design and spatial equity into local constitutions or charters, creating a legal framework that binds future administrations to a core vision. The creation of public land trusts is another powerful tool, removing vital parcels from the speculative market to preserve them for future generations as green space, cultural sites, or infrastructure corridors. These are not perfect solutions, but they represent a crucial recognition that democracy must sometimes build protective structures around its own future self to prevent the tyranny of the present from mortgaging tomorrow. Engaging in this difficult work is in itself a radical act of faith. It is a declaration that a community believes not only in its own current values, but in its capacity to collectively imagine, agree upon, and protect a shared future landscape. It moves the city from being a mere backdrop of our lives to becoming an active project of intergenerational partnership. The straight line of a planned avenue, therefore, becomes more than a path for traffic. It becomes a line of trust drawn in the present, extending into a future we are choosing to build for people we will never meet. A grid can conquer space, but can it defy nature? The most enduring geometric plans understood a fundamental truth, that a city is not an island imposed upon the land, but a part of a living landscape. Truly transgenerational thinking must be sustainable, or it is simply a blueprint for eventual collapse. History is filled with cautionary tales where magnificent, orderly cities fell not to invaders, but to the silent rebellion of their own environment. The ancient Mesopotamian city of Ur, for all its grandeur, saw its agricultural hinterland slowly poisoned by salt. Intensive irrigation without proper drainage caused salinization, a creeping death for the soil that eventually strangled the food supply the city depended on. Their geometric order, focused inward, failed to account for the larger ecological system. Similarly, the mysterious collapse of the Maya city-states in the Classic period is linked by many researchers to a combination of prolonged drought and severe deforestation, as growing populations cleared land for agriculture and used vast quantities of lime plaster for their towering pyramids and palaces. Their precise astronomical alignments and ceremonial plazas were a triumph of planning, yet that plan may have overlooked the fragile balance of the rainforest that supported them. These were not failures of geometry, but failures of ecological foresight. The plan served the human community brilliantly for centuries, but it did not serve the land, and in the end, the land withdrew its support. This reveals a critical dimension of long-term vision. A plan must be in dialogue with water, soil, and climate, not just with human ambition. It asks us to see the city not as a separate entity, but as an organism within a larger living body. Some ancient planners intuitively grasped this. Consider the canal-based cities like Suzhou in China, founded over 2,500 years ago. Instead of fighting the region's abundant waterways, its designers wove the city into them. A network of canals became the primary transportation grid, with streets and bridges built to complement the flow of water. This was a plan in harmony with hydrology, using the landscape's natural features to create a system that cooled the city, moved goods, managed water levels, and provided defense. It was a geometric plan, but its primary lines were liquid. Similarly, Amsterdam's famous concentric canals, dug in the 17th century, were a masterful act of reclamation and coexistence. The city's iconic half-moon shape and radiating waterways were not just for beauty, they were an essential part of a managed ecosystem, a way to drain swampy land, control flooding, and create stable foundations for building. These cities thrived because their geometry was an extension of the land's own logic. They worked with the environment, not against it, and in doing so, they built a resilience that has carried them into the modern age. This ancient wisdom is finding new expression in the modern movement of ecological urbanism. Today's planners are consciously designing cities that integrate natural systems into their very fabric from the start. This means designing street grids that also function as watersheds, channeling rainwater into bioswales, and replenishing groundwater instead of overloading sewers. It means preserving wildlife corridors within the urban matrix so that the city does not become an ecological dead zone. It means orienting buildings and arranging green spaces to maximize natural cooling, reducing the urban heat island effect. This approach represents the ultimate evolution of transgenerational thinking. It is no longer just planning a city for future human generations. It is planning a city for the future of the entire local ecosystem upon which those humans depend. The geometry becomes a tool for stewardship, a way to hard-code respect for natural limits and cycles into the urban form. It acknowledges that the most important legacy we can leave is not just a well-ordered street, but a living, breathing, sustainable habitat. The straight line of a boulevard and the curving path of a restored creek can be part of the same coherent vision, a blueprint for a future where the city and the land are finally understood as one. The ancient planner's most powerful tool was a simple line in the sand. Ours is a line of code, a digital ghost of a city not yet born. In the 21st century, the quest for transgenerational planning has entered a new, virtual dimension. Planners and engineers now construct entire cities inside computers, creating what are known as digital twins, intricate virtual models that mirror every street, pipe, and power line of a real urban environment. These are not static drawings, but living simulations fed by vast rivers of data. With them, we can run experiments on the future. We can introduce a hypothetical geometric grid and then fast-forward time, watching how traffic flows during a monsoon in 20 years, or where shadows fall from skyscrapers not yet designed. We can simulate the impact of a new subway line on neighborhood growth over 50 years, or model how a coastal city's perfect grid will interact with projected sea level rise a century from now. This is a power the builders of Mohenjo-Daro or Teotihuacan could scarcely dream of, the ability to witness the long-term consequences of a design decision before laying a single stone. It turns planning from an act of faith into a discipline of foresight. We are no longer just drawing blueprints, we are scripting possible futures and choosing the most resilient path. This digital foresight represents the ultimate evolution of the ancient impulse. It allows us to design geometric plans that are not only orderly and beautiful, but are stress-tested against the uncertainties of climate, economics, and demography. We can see where population pressure will strain a water system in 3 decades and proactively design the infrastructure to meet that challenge. The grid becomes a dynamic, responsive entity, its elegance proven not just on paper, but through 1,000 simulated tomorrows. Yet this incredible power brings with it a profound new responsibility. The technology itself is neutral. It can be used to design a fortress for exclusivity or a garden for communal well-being. Our task is to use these tools with the same stewardship the ancients aspired to, but with far greater clarity. We must ensure our digital simulations are fed by the right questions. Are we planning for equitable access to green space, for communities that can withstand economic shifts, for urban forms that heal rather than harm the environment. The virtual model allows us to move beyond geometric elegance alone to demand designs that are demonstrably sustainable, adaptable, and just for the long haul. It asks us to peer through the digital looking glass and make choices today for citizens who will walk those virtual streets long after we are gone, turning our highest aspirations into a resilient, living geometry. Even the most brilliant geometric vision can remain a phantom, a ghost of a future that never arrived. History's archive of urban planning is filled with these hauntingly beautiful unfinished diagrams, grand designs that were conceived with breathtaking foresight but were ultimately abandoned on the drawing board. They are the shadow counterparts to the enduring cities we have explored, and their stories hold a different but equally vital set of lessons. Consider the restless mind of Leonardo da Vinci in the late 15th century. Observing the squalor and plague-ridden conditions of Renaissance Milan, he conceived of a radical, two-tiered ideal city. His plan was a marvel of forward-thinking geometry and public health, featuring elevated walkways for the wealthy, lower-level canals for commerce and waste removal, and a logical separation of functions to improve sanitation. It was a blueprint for a healthier, more rational urban life, conceived centuries ahead of its time. Yet it remained just that, a blueprint. The staggering cost, the technological limitations of the era, and perhaps a lack of a powerful patron willing to champion such a disruptive project, left Leonardo's city as a series of exquisite sketches. Similarly, the ambitious plan for Washington, D.C., conceived by Pierre-Charles L'Enfant in the 1790s, envisioned a vast radial web of grand avenues superimposed on a grid, symbolizing a new kind of democratic order. While the core was realized, much of the grand radial sweep into the surrounding countryside was never fully executed, scaled back due to budgetary constraints and the practical realities of a young nation's growth. These incomplete visions are not failures, they are profound case studies. They teach us that a long-term geometric plan, no matter how logically perfect or symbolically powerful, cannot survive on visionary appeal alone. It needs a foundation in the possible. The most common pitfalls are starkly practical, overwhelming financial cost, a sudden shift in political winds that withdraws crucial support, or a design so conceptually pure that it forgets the messy, immediate needs of the people who are supposed to inhabit it. A plan that exists only for a distant future with no benefit for the present creates no constituency. No one becomes emotionally or economically invested in its success. The critical insight from these ghost plans is about the psychology of building for tomorrow. For a transgenerational vision to take root, it must have a viable starting point, a first phase that delivers tangible, appreciated benefits within a human lifetime. Think of it as planting the first orchard, not just mapping the entire future forest. That initial harvest of value, be it improved health, economic opportunity, or simply a beautiful new public square, creates something essential: stakeholders. It creates people whose lives are demonstrably better because of the plan, people who will then have a personal stake in defending and continuing that vision for their children. They become the plan's guardians, its political advocates, and its cultural inheritors. The unfinished geometric diagrams of history whisper a cautionary truth across the centuries. A legacy is not declared by a magnificent drawing. It is built one practical, beneficial step at a time, winning the faith of each new generation, who then take up the work of turning a ghost into a home. A street laid today is a decision made for someone not yet born. When we draw a geometric grid intended to last 500 years, we are silently answering 1,000 intimate questions for future citizens. We decide in advance whether their primary way to school will be a walk down a tree-lined lane or a congested drive on a highway. We determine the shape of their neighborhoods, the amount of sunlight that will reach their kitchen window, and the very view from their front door. This is the profound and often unspoken ethical layer beneath every master plan. It forces us to ask, what right do we have to impose such a lasting physical legacy on people who cannot consent, who cannot vote against our blueprint, who will simply inherit the world we leave in stone and concrete? Is this act the height of arrogance, a form of temporal tyranny where the present dictates the future? Or is it, conversely, the deepest form of responsibility, a sacred act of stewardship where we use our brief moment in time to build a stable, beautiful, and functional foundation for those who come after? This philosophical tension adds a necessary depth to the practical work of planning. It challenges us to see our grand geometric designs not as permanent, inflexible dictates, but as thoughtful gifts. The most considerate gift is not one that forces the recipient to use it in only one way, but one that provides a sturdy framework within which they can express their own creativity and adapt to their own unique needs. Think of it as building a house with strong, well-placed load-bearing walls, but leaving the interior rooms as open spaces. The structure is secure and lasting, but how those rooms are used, decorated, and lived in is left for each new generation to decide. A transgenerational plan, therefore, succeeds not when it perfectly predicts the future, but when it thoughtfully prepares for the unknown. It provides clarity, a reliable grid, clean water, accessible green space, while consciously leaving pockets of ambiguity, plots of land zoned for flexibility, and corridors that can be adapted for technologies we cannot yet name. The ethical test of a plan lies in this balance. Are we building a monument to our own certainty, or are we building a resilient platform for future possibility? Are we designing a city to be admired, or a city to be lived in and lovingly altered by countless hands we will never meet? The silent geometry of a street map is, in the end, a conversation across time. It begins with our lines and our vision, but its true meaning will be written by the footsteps, the renovations, and the new dreams of every generation that calls it home. Our legacy should not be a finished sentence, but a compelling first chapter, inviting those who follow to continue the story. Yet for all its promise of order and longevity, the geometric grid is not the only path to a city's soul. There exists an equally powerful, ancient magic in the winding alleyways of a medieval hill town, the labyrinthine souks of an ancient trading city, or the intimate courtyards of a neighborhood that grew slowly over centuries without a single master plan. These are places born not from a ruler's decree, but from the accumulated footsteps of daily life. Their streets curve and narrow, following the contours of the land, the path of an old cow trail, or the invisible boundaries between family plots. To walk through such a city is a sensory journey of surprise. A tight corner opens suddenly onto a tiny, sun-drenched plaza with a single bubbling fountain. A covered passageway leads to a hidden garden you could never have predicted from the main road. This organic growth creates a human scale that feels instinctively comforting. Buildings are often modest, added incrementally, their varied materials and angles telling a visual story of generations adapting to their needs and means. Sociologists and urban thinkers like Jane Jacobs famously championed this very messiness. She argued that the short blocks, mixed uses, and constant eyes on the street in organically grown neighborhoods like her own Greenwich Village fostered natural surveillance, vibrant street life, and a deep, resilient sense of community. The very lack of a grand geometric plan forced interaction, created chance encounters, and allowed communities to shape their own environment in real time. In the dense, winding quarters of Old Jerusalem or the clustered villages of the Greek islands, the urban fabric itself seems to encourage conversation, to slow you down, to make you a participant rather than just a passerby on a predetermined route. This presents a crucial and beautiful counterpoint to the geometric ideal. It asks us whether ultimate efficiency and perfect order might sometimes come at the cost of spontaneity, intimacy, and the quirky, unpredictable charm that gives a city its unique character. The geometric plan can feel imposing, even authoritarian in its clarity, while the organic city feels conversational, a dialogue between people and place. So where does this leave our search for the perfect transgenerational city? Perhaps the healthiest urban future is not found in choosing one model over the other, but in recognizing the vital tension between them. It is not a battle to be won, but a balance to be struck. Think of it as a dialectic, a continuous conversation across time between the planned and the unplanned, between the long-term framework and the short-term improvisation. The most resilient and beloved cities in history often embody this synthesis. They possess a strong, underlying geometric armature, a foundational grid, a clear waterfront, a set of major public spaces that provides orientation, allows for efficient infrastructure, and guides growth. But upon that stable skeleton, they allow for the rich, organic flesh of community life to grow. The geometric plan becomes the canvas, not the finished painting. In modern Copenhagen, the finger plan established clear corridors for development and transit, but within those corridors, neighborhoods like Christiania or Nørrebro developed their own distinct organic character. In New York City, the relentless grip of the Commissioner's Plan of 1811 created the famous gridiron of Manhattan. But within those uniform blocks, incredibly diverse and vibrant micro-neighborhoods have blossomed, each with its own rhythm and identity, from the chaotic energy of Chinatown's cramped streets to the leafy, quiet rows of the West Village, which famously defied the grid. The geometric framework provided the city with a scalable, navigable structure that could handle immense growth, while the unplanned, human-scale life within it gave the city its soul. This suggests that the highest purpose of a transgenerational geometric plan may not be to dictate every detail, but to create a resilient and generous armature. It is a gift of structure that says, here is a foundation that will last for centuries, here is clean water and reliable transport, here are the main arteries and the protected public commons. Now, within this strong and enduring frame, weave your own lives. Build your homes with the materials you love. Open the cafes where you see fit. Let your festivals spill into the squares and allow the paths between houses to become the intimate alleyways of tomorrow. The plan sets the stage, but it wisely leaves the script to be written and rewritten by every generation that inherits it. In this vision, the straight line and the winding path are not enemies, but partners in a timeless dance, together creating cities that are both efficient for the future and deeply human for the present. The fingerprints of a 1,000-year plan are surprisingly consistent. After journeying through the ancient grids of Mohenjo-Daro and the celestial axes of Teotihuacan, the bureaucratic diligence of Rome and the ecological harmony of Suzhou, a pattern comes into focus. We can now distill the essential principles that separate a fleeting monument from a lasting foundation. These are the hallmarks of a truly transgenerational design. First, at its heart lies a simple, replicable core structure. This is the genius of the Roman grid or the Hippodamian plan, a clear geometric logic so fundamental it can be understood, maintained, and even expanded upon by people speaking different languages centuries later. It is a strong, basic grammar for city building. Second, this skeleton is inseparable from essential, maintainable infrastructure. The plan prioritizes what lies beneath and between the buildings, the water channels, the drainage, the public squares, the arteries that keep the urban body alive. A beautiful grid without a functioning aqueduct is a blueprint for collapse. Third, and perhaps most crucially, the plan must serve a purpose bigger than any single ruler. It aligns with a broader cultural, economic, or ideological vision, whether that is Romanization, democratic citizenship, or cosmic harmony. This gives successive generations a stake in its preservation, it becomes their city, not just a dead king's vanity project. Fourth, this vision is guarded by enduring institutions, the surveyors, the scribes, the planning commissions, who act as the memory and conscience of the plan, enforcing its continuity against the short-term pressures of the present. Fifth, the design balances clarity with intelligent adaptability. It provides a stable framework, like Barcelona's Eixample grid, while allowing the interior life of blocks to evolve, ensuring the city can breathe and change without losing its core identity. Finally, it demonstrates a profound respect for environmental constraints, working with the hydrology of a canal or the path of the sun, rather than imposing a rigid geometry upon a hostile landscape. Together, these principles form a quiet checklist, a lens through which we can evaluate not only the ruins of the past but the glossy renderings of future megacities presented today. When we see a new urban plan, we can ask, does it have this kind of resilient simplicity? Is it building the hidden systems first? Does it serve a lasting human need or just a political moment? And most importantly, is it designed for a single ribbon-cutting ceremony, or for the slow, patient, beautiful unfolding of centuries? The answer tells us everything about what kind of ancestors we intend to be. That final principle is not just about ancient stones, it is a mirror held up to our own time. The quiet geometry of a 500-year-old street asks a silent, urgent question of us, the current custodians of the world. What invisible lines are we drawing today that will define the lives of our great-grandchildren? For them, the legacy of our era will not be a debate we had online or a quarterly earnings report, but the physical and social foundations we either built wisely or neglected entirely. It might not manifest as a grand geometric city, but as something equally foundational, perhaps the robust architecture of a global data commons, designed with ethical guardrails to protect their privacy in a world we cannot envision. It could be the patient, century-long project of rewilding a continent, restoring watersheds and migratory corridors, so they inherit a planet that is healing, not just surviving. Or it might be the enduring institution, a university or a research trust, funded and structured to pursue knowledge for its own sake across generations, free from the political winds of any single decade. This is not about nostalgia for the past, but about adopting a specific mindset from those ancient planners, the courage to think in centuries. They understood that a society's highest calling is to build the platform upon which future greatness can stand. That requires valuing legacy over the immediate payoff, investing in the invisible infrastructure of stability, and making choices whose full beauty will only be revealed long after we are gone. Our modern world, however, is engineered for the opposite. We are immersed in the churn of the 24-hour news cycle, the relentless pressure for quarterly growth, the rapid obsolescence of our technology and our trends. This environment makes the act of planting an oak tree feel like a radical, almost irrational act of faith. Why plant something that will take 50 years to mature when you can have instant landscaping? Yet the oak, like the aqueduct or the master plan, is a covenant with the future. It is a gift that says, I trust that you will be here, and I want your world to be better for my presence, however faint my memory may be. So how do we cultivate this long-term consciousness in a short-term world? It begins with a simple, daily reorientation. In our professions, it means championing the durable product over the disposable one, the repairable system over the locked proprietary gadget. In our communities, it means advocating for policies that may not show benefits until the next administration, like investing in teacher training or green energy grids. In our personal lives, it could be as tangible as compiling a family archive of stories and lessons, not for our own glory, but as a compass for descendants navigating a world we cannot predict. This is the ultimate takeaway from the silent, geometric cities. They are proof that humanity is capable of breathtaking foresight and profound generosity across the abyss of time. They remind us that our time here is brief, but our responsibility is long. The most meaningful project we can ever undertake is to become good ancestors. To look at the blank slate of tomorrow and with great care draw the first few straight lines of a foundation we will never live upon, but in which we place our deepest hope that those who come after will find it strong and beautiful and full of possibility. These silent grids are a testament to faith in the future itself. The geometric city plans of antiquity are far more than historical curiosities or feats of engineering. They are profound, physical statements of hope and responsibility. They reveal civilizations that dared to think beyond the narrow horizon of a single lifetime, investing immense labor and collective vision into creating order, beauty, and functionality for people they would never meet, strangers of the distant future. From the hidden, brick-lined drains of Mohenjo-Daro that promised public health for centuries, to the celestial axes of Teotihuacan that anchored a community to the cosmos, these designs whisper a consistent message across the millennia. They speak to an enduring human desire, a deep-seated need to create something lasting and meaningful, to leave behind a world more orderly and beautiful than the one we found. This impulse transcends culture and continent, appearing in the Roman surveyor's unwavering line and the Renaissance thinker's perfect square. It is a universal signature of a society that sees itself not as an endpoint, but as a link in a very long chain. As we face our own era's daunting, long-term challenges, from environmental stewardship to building equitable communities, these ancient blueprints offer a quiet but powerful reminder. They show us that the most impactful legacy is often not a towering statue celebrating one individual, but a thoughtful, resilient plan, a gift of order and possibility passed silently from one generation to the next. This legacy asks for our participation. It invites us to look at our own world, our own communities and choices with longer eyes, to consider what foundations we are laying down today that will either support or constrain the world of 100 years from now. The ancient planners challenge us to move beyond the short-term cycle and ask the most profound question we can: what are we building for people we will never know? Perhaps in the comments you might share what you believe our generation is planning or creating that has the potential to echo for centuries. Is it a digital framework, an ecological restoration, a new kind of social institution? The conversation across time continues, and now it is our turn to add our line to the blueprint.